I think you didn't go to the Prime Minister's wedding. I think I'm correct in saying that, but do you know anyone who did?
No, I didn't. It was clearly a very private, very small family affair. All I would say is congratulations to the Prime Minister and to Carrie for tying the knot.
I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear that. Do you know if he's taking a honeymoon?
I don't. I'm afraid. Again, as I say, I think these things are private family occasions, and I think it's right that we afford them the same respect as you would anybody else.
Okay, let's move on to talk about your speciality, COVID vaccines. Let's start with the Indian variant, if we can. Can I ask you, is there still really nothing in the data suggests that we should delay step 4, as the Prime Minister said on Thursday?
So we will obviously share all the data, and as the Prime Minister has done with step 1, step 2, and step 3, which was on the 17th of May, on the 14th of June. And that is an important moment because we're still in that phase of data gathering. The vaccines have been incredibly effective, and it was great to see Public Health England deliver that data as well into real-world data that both the Pfizer and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines are effective in 2 doses against the B.1.617.2, the so-called Indian variant, which is why everyone listening to this interview, I hope if you get your text or the call, please go and get your second jab. Very important that we do that for the over 50s nationally and do that rapidly because it is a race between the vaccination program and the virus. The virus will mutate, Tom. It mutates hundreds of times, thousands of times, I should say. There were 3, if you recall, 3 variants from India on 617.1, 0.2, and 0.3, and it turned out that 0.2 was the one that is of interest initially and then of concern later. So it is. We have to proceed with caution. We will share that data with the nation and the analysis behind it before the 21st.
Okay.
But we have to be careful.
It is interesting in your lengthy and interesting answer there to me that you didn't repeat the Prime Minister's assertion that there is nothing the data suggests that we should delay step 4 any longer. It does seem that perhaps the government, certainly you, are a little bit more cautious about step 4 now going ahead.
Well, no, I mean, essentially, we've got to keep an eye on, if you remember, the 4 tests. One is that we vaccinate at scale. That's happening, big tick. That vaccines continue to work against the variants. That's also a big tick because we've seen the Public Health England data and we're seeing it on the ground as well, places like Bolton and Blackburn, Darwin and in Bedford and elsewhere. The 3rd test is on infections, and that is rising, as you opened this program by saying. We have to keep a very close eye on that because we need to make sure that we've broken the link between infection rates and serious illness. But if you get younger people being hospitalised and taking up that hospital space and putting that pressure on the NHS, we have to share that with the nation on the 14th. And the 4th is vaccines of concern. We have to keep an eye on those variants of concern. Variants of concern, forgive me. We have to keep a very close eye on variants of concern.
Well, let's talk about that 4th test, because I would suggest to you that there is indeed something in the data that suggests that step 4 may or may not need to go ahead, but something has changed, and that is the Indian variant, which we've been discussing with you at length, is only successfully tackled by 2 vaccine doses. That was obviously the JCVI's finding last weekend. Not 1, which was what was deemed as certainly enough to tackle the Kent variant initially. So there is a major change in the facts here. Now, so far you've only given 2 jabs to 47% of the adult population. Step 4 is 22 days away now. If you look at Israel, they only started fully unlocking when they hit 70% of the population with 2 jabs, and that was without the Indian variant. So if you just do some primitive maths, it really does begin to look like we're just not going to have jabbed enough people with 2 doses in time to unlock everything at step 4 safely in just 22 days' time.
So as I said earlier, it is a race between the vaccination program and the virus. The virus will continue to mutate, and obviously we are currently dealing with the B.1.617.2 variant. We will absolutely continue to vaccinate at scale 2 jabs, and we've brought the second jab forward to 8 weeks from 12 weeks for anyone over the age of 50, and we hope that by the 21st of June we would have given 2 jabs to all 1 to 9 categories of phase 1, which is everybody over the age of 50, and share the data. The important thing is that we, as we've done in each and every step of the way, we will share that information, share the data with the country, and give them that time to prepare. But you are right in saying that this is a big race between the vaccination program and the virus, as other countries are finding out. By the way, people hold up Singapore and Taiwan and Australia as sort of the best in breed in terms of border controls. They're also having to deal with the Indian variant. So the virus has mutated, and we have to, at some point, learn to live with a certain amount of virus in the community. The important thing is those 4 tests, and that test around infection rates and, of course, variants of concern are the ones that probably have the.
I understand what you said on that, but I understand what you said on that. The basic point is, though, if you read your roadmap, which we have all done, June the 21st is 22 days away. In 22 days' time, unless something happens dramatically and you step in and change this, I can go to a party with 1,000 other people there. I can go to a rock concert in Wembley Stadium with 100,000 people there in 22 days' time. That, to me, feels just incredibly unlikely. Do you not share that sense of unlikelihood?
Well, as I say, we will share the data. All I would say to you is, as Oliver Dowden has said, who's the Secretary of State at Culture, Media and Sport, that the pilots of large-scale, as you described them, gatherings in terms of test before entry and then test after and monitor the infection rates have gone extremely well. But again, I go back and say to you, we have to be cautious. We will share the data on the 14th of June. And we have to keep a very close eye on infection rates and try and suppress them, which is why please come forward for your second dose. Remember, if you're going to meet friends and family, outdoors is better than indoors, hands face to face. It's really sort of making sure that we do this together if we're going to get to the 21st of June.
Let's wait and see what we look forward to that moment. I understand you don't want to go any further now, but let me just ask you about this while we're talking about variants. What more can you tell us about the Thai variant, or Egyptian variant, and some people call it, this new one that has been designated a variant under investigation, C36.3? What are its properties that have designating it a variant under consideration?
So the way the biosecurity team work, Tom, is they look. There are hundreds of mutations of this, thousands, in fact, in the UK, and tens of thousands around the world. The way they do this is most of them they dismiss. Some of them they then characterise as variants of under investigation to keep a close eye on them to see whether there's any escape from the vaccination program or have properties that deliver higher infection rates. Whether the mutation.
I understand, and I'm asking you, what properties does it have to allow it to be designated a variant under investigation?
Well, those are some of the properties that designate the mutations as variants under investigation are looking at whether it could exhibit mutations that would allow it to be more infectious, or of course escape the vaccination program.
And do you have any indications whether it is more infectious or whether it could escape?
No. I mean, they keep all these variants under investigation, and if they then worry about them, they become a variant of concern, as we've had with the B617.2. Remember, we had B1617.1 and .3 that weren't indicated as variants of concern. They were under investigation, but they weren't of concern. And then we act appropriately. We have one of the largest genome sequencing infrastructures in the world. We account for just under 50% of genome sequencing. We then surge test at scale by postcode. We also use wastewater data, and we've now covered 2/3 of England with our ability to analyze wastewater. And then we genome sequence and isolate. So there's a combination of large-scale vaccination and surge testing and genome sequencing and isolating.
One way to keep ahead of the Indian variant, and indeed the Thai variant, if it becomes a variant of concern, is by, of course, increasing the supply of vaccines. You've just described it very colourfully as a very, very close race. So what can you tell us about supply over the next few weeks and months? Because it's been increasing recently, hasn't it? It's back up to 700,000 a day, which we were seeing in March after that lull in April. Can we see that level remain or even increase?
So we've got good, stable supply. It remains finite is probably the best way I would describe it. I.e., I could do with more supply because we've built an infrastructure in the UK that can deploy at scale. I think our record was 27 jabs a second. If I'm able to get more supply, of course, I will be able to protect more people more rapidly. But we have good visibility of supply to meet our target for the end of July to offer the vaccine to every adult, one dose to every adult by the end of July.
But does good supply, as you just said, good stable supply, does that mean a continuation of 600,000 or 700,000 jabs a day as we're now seeing?
What I would say, it would mean confidence in meeting the target for end of July to give one dose to all adults in the United Kingdom.
Okay. When can those in their 20s expect their first jab? Presumably next week if you're doing over 30s now.
We're doing well. We're obviously doing anyone over the age of 30 at the moment to get their first jab. So when you get the text message or the call, please come forward and get your first jab. And of course, very importantly, the second jab for everybody over the age of 50, because actually to suppress the ability for this B1617.2 to infect people is that double jab protection is really, really important. And then we will announce when we'll open up to the under 30s, so people in their 20s. As soon as we get there, I promise you.
Next week?
And you will hear about it as well. I'm not going to go on record and say, give you a date for next week or any other week, other than to say we will continue with the success of the vaccination program, as we've proved over many, many months now, and we'll get there together. And as I say, when you get the call, please come and have your jab.
Now, the other thing that is bubbling up as a concern for many parents is this decision on whether to vaccinate children. I wonder, when are you going to make it? Because you'd have heard Anthony Hardman, perhaps, Deputy Chair of the JCVA on Times Radio yesterday, and other scientists saying this is now too much of an ethical question for scientists, for the JCVI alone to decide. It has to be a decision at the end of the day taken by politicians. So when will we hear it?
So I talk to Anthony Harridan all the time and the team at the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Obviously, the US regulator and the Canadian regulator have now approved the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds. It was already approved for 16 and above. Our regulator will have to look at it. Children obviously do get COVID, and some of them get long COVID. But on the whole, you'd be vaccinating them to protect their families, their communities, and the wider society. So the vaccine has to be safe for children, which is why our regulator has to approve it. And of course, we will discuss this with the JCVI. There are greater, obviously, questions or considerations, i.e., disrupting children's education if the virus takes off again, creates probably as much harm to their future, to their mental well-being. So we will look at all these things, but the JCVI will make a recommendation on this, and if our regulator approves it, the deployment side, the deployment infrastructure is ready to be able to deploy vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds.
Mr. Zahawi, the JCVI said this is a decision for you, not them.
Well, no, it's a joint decision because the JCVI, I think, need to be able to look at the safety data for children. They need to make sure they take into consideration disruption to children's education, to mental health well-being. So there's a number of factors that they need to consider in coming to advice to us. And then once we have received that advice, you're absolutely right, it will be our decision.
Let me ask you this before Isabel has a couple of questions for you. What's your feeling on whether a leak at the Wuhan laboratory for virology was the cause of coronavirus? Now, we don't know for sure, but where do you think this is heading? President Biden, as you'll know, has asked US intelligence agencies to investigate this theory.
Well, I think President Biden is right to essentially say, look, we must leave no stone unturned in understanding where this virus came from, where it emanated from, to be able to understand the reasons behind this pandemic. I absolutely think that the WHO needs to be able to carry out its investigation unencumbered, and that really does need to happen, because not only for our understanding of this particular virus and this pandemic, but for future pandemics. And I think added to that, it was great to see our Prime Minister take the initiative to announce that we will lead the world on a global radar in terms of tracking this virus and mutations from it, and of course other viruses that may cause us concern in the future.
Good morning, Mr. Zahawi. It's Isabel here. I wondered how you felt about Dominic Cummings' evidence to the Select Committees on Wednesday, given he pointed the finger repeatedly at your boss in the Health Department, Matt Hancock. Was there anything you felt that stuck about what he said?
So I've been working with Matt for 7 months now as deployment minister, and I can tell you that from what I read and saw bits of it, I think it's a complete mischaracterization, because from what I see is a Secretary of State who is not only committed to delivering the best outcomes for the people that he is there to protect, which is the most vulnerable to this pandemic, and of course people who need to the health system to deliver for them now and in the future. A Secretary of State who works all hours and is incredibly focused, and I would say probably one of the most talented members of the team in terms of making sure that we deliver. If you look at what we've done with the vaccination program, again, there was a criticism in the evidence around civil service. I've got to tell you, the senior responsible officer for the vaccination program, Emily Lawson, is one of the best people you could ever work with. I'd hire her in a heartbeat in the private sector. The senior responsible officer on the supply side, Maddie McTurnan, one of the best you can work with. And so
lots of very impressive people, and no one's doubting Mr. Hancock's commitment to the job. But what was being thrown into doubt this week was his commitment to the truth, wasn't it? Would you say that everything Dominic Cummings said about Matt Hancock telling lies in Downing Street, about testing of residents going from hospital into care homes, would you say all of that was completely untrue?
Well, what I would say is hindsight is a wonderful thing. You've got to put this in context. We entered this pandemic. We were in the eye of the storm of this pandemic with a non-existent diagnostics capability in the UK. What I mean by that is we could only do about 2,000 tests a day in the United Kingdom, the whole of the United Kingdom. And those tests had to go, some to the front line who were putting their lives at risk to obviously save others, some to the most vulnerable, who were patients being discharged or in the senior residential care homes. And what Matt did was set an ambitious target of getting to 100,000. By the way, I've got to tell you, I think targets is a really good thing to do in government. We've done it in the vaccination program, and it really does work because it focuses the system, the mind, to get to that target. Now, if you go from 2,000 tests a day capability to the last 7 days being able to conduct 6 million plus tests, it just demonstrates to you the size of the challenge between last year and this year. And Matt, I think, did everything in his capability. You can only do the best that you can deliver with the resources available to you. So hindsight is a great thing to say, well, if we did have the capacity to do 1 million tests a day, should we be doing more? Of course we should be, and we will learn those lessons, because there's going to be a public inquiry in the spring of 2022 where people can come under oath and give all sides of the story. We heard a little bit of the story with Dominic Cummings before the Select Committee, but we need to hear the whole story. and then learn from it.